Hello, this is Pharaoh Vincent. I'm coming to you with the Final Fantasy update, specifically regarding the mechanics and a little bit about what the game is all about. But to understand, I think Final Fantasy in general is really to understand the IP or the intellectual property is kind of the best starting point. Every Final Fantasy game is its own story. So you don't need to play the games before it or the games after it in order to understand what is going on. It's its own self contained story. It's its own self contained world, generally speaking, with its own characters. And the crossover between stories, between worlds, is generally very minimal, with exception to a few things. So, what is in every Final Fantasy game? The magic is all generally the same. The summons, the in this game they call them icons specifically, but in some games they may be an eidolon, they may be an esper, they could just be referred to as a summon or a primal, right? Those are in every game, and those are generally the same to similar in every game. There are some variations between games, but for the most part they remain very close to what the original games have, right? And so, for instance, like Ifrit is a summon who is in every game, and surprisingly is typically a bad guy in the last two games, but that's beside the point. You get to know this a little more. The other thing that every Final Fantasy game tends to carry over is a few named characters. So there's like usually a Biggs and a Wedge and a Cid in every single game, because there might as well be. There's also a couple of weapons that are generally in every game, things like that. So there's some crossover here and there, but for the most part, every game is its own story, right? That part has never crossed over between games, with mild exception to Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy XI, but those are the MMORPGs and they are their own animal. They can play homage to other worlds, but only for a limited time. So that's kind of the backdrop of Final Fantasy itself. Every iteration of the game is a role playing game. So even from the start, they start off with a story, they start off with their main characters, and it really follows that hero's journey for every single game. And if you're not familiar with the hero's journey, you will be by the end of our video series. But that's a lot of the game. So, what you need to know about the mechanics. In this particular instance, Final Fantasy XVI is an action RPG, which is to be stated a little differently. The earliest iterations of the games are all turn based role playing games. They're a bit more tactical, whereas this is a lot more action based, right? It's more God of War esque, because games like God of War, games like, Rise, trying to think of some of the other ones, but like there's a bunch out there. The action role playing games are very common, and they all kind of have some tropes you might get used to as time goes on. But we'll get into that maybe in another video analysis of, like specific genres or something like that. But for the most part, you know what to expect. There's going to be multiple forms of attack. There's going to be multiple forms of, dodging, blocking, like casting magic, using abilities, leveling up, etc., etc. There's going to be currencies to buy things. So we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics you need to know for combat, and we're going to really focus in on that for the rest of this video. So the cornerstone of Final Fantasy XVI, the things that you really need to understand about how the game works, comes down to the different ways you can attack. So that's kind of the first starting point. Your main attack is always going to be with your sword or weapon, and Clive, the main character, generally seems like a melee character. He's fairly adept at melee combat. His magic isn't quite as powerful as some other characters that he travels with on a fairly regular basis. And so you kind of find yourself using a lot more physical attacks with Clive than magical ones. The other thing to note is the use of magic. So this game handles it in a little bit of a unique way compared to some of the other installments. For instance, Final Fantasy XV was also an action RPG, and the magic in that one was a lot stronger from the people who casted it, but it wasn't something you could always do. Whereas in this game, you can spam a magical attack as much as you want, right? You can, blow somebody up over and over again, and it generally works out well. And it's a viable strategy. So there's no real major complex combos in a traditional sense for an action game. So for anyone used to like Devil May Cry, for instance, there's nothing that's really super complicated. The hardest thing to learn at first is really just mastering the Magic Burst combo. And that's assuming that you're not using any of the accessories that do this for you automatically. They actually give you an item in the game that will automatically do this. So if you're one of those people who wants to play just to enjoy the story, you don't have to really worry about this part. There's some stuff that you would want to learn, but for the most part, you don't have to worry about anything too specific. The magic burst is basically right after a melee attack, you hit your magic attack button and you will do a magic burst. You can do this after each attack in your 4-attack combo, with the last one hitting particularly hard. So that's a good thing to understand for offense in the game. There are some special abilities where you can hold down a button and it does things, but for the most part, you won't deal with those too much. The next thing to understand about this game is the iconic abilities. So icons are summons. They are primals. They're whatever you can figure out in some other games. Your circle ability uses your current icon, which there are more than one, but it uses your current icon's iconic ability. And I mean iconic, not like ICON, it's like EKON, I think. I will make fun of myself if I spelled it wrong later. But the iconic abilities that you start off with, or the iconic ability I should say you start off with, is a dash. You see me doing it quite a bit in these because I am used to circle being dodge. So from some of these early videos, I hadn't quite gotten used to the evade button being R1. But either way, you can handle those. They work out pretty good. The first one you get is a dash, and it's actually pretty decent. Does a lot of damage, and it has a good distance. You do get other ones later in the game, but you can kind of deal with those as you get them. The next thing to understand is kind of like the iconic magic. It's the abilities. And this is where you hold R2 and you hit square or triangle. In either one of those instances, you can select what ability you have. So you can see me fairly frequently using Cyclone when I jump in the middle of people. And then the other one is the Phoenix, I think Rush or Punch. I don't remember. Falcon Punch. We need to make that joke. Someone Smash Bros now. But you want to make sure that you are using those abilities fairly frequently, because you can save them for when you stagger somebody, but they have a cooldown, which is where it takes time for you to be able to do it again. And so popping or using the abilities on cooldown is pretty much recommended because it's going to make the game go a lot faster. I underutilize it in this footage. You should probably use it more than I have been. And I start to use it a lot more later, but you will see that in, updated footage about bosses and stuff like that down the road. So that is the main abilities there. You will be able to switch between icons when you get more than one. And the last thing that you really need to understand regarding the mechanics of this particular game comes down to healing and how healing works. So, So the big part about healing is you have a limited number of potions. These potions are done by hitting up, down, left, or right on your D-pad. Left will switch between your wolf and your potions. And then really up, right, and down are the main ones you would be using. Up being a regular potion, right being a high potion, down being some form of special potion that you use, unless you decide to change the order in which you bind them, which you can do in the main menu. The potions will heal all of your hit points, and so you will actually get all of your green bar back. It will be that solid green color. When you get hit, you're going to lose a portion of solid green hit points, and then you're going to have a portion of this kind of light green color, or like more of a hollowed out color. That can actually be restored to you by using Cure from your companion Torgal, who is your wolf. And he can actually basically give you like a regen. It's not like a traditional cure where it gets you those hit points back instantaneously. It does heal over time. And so avoiding damage while you are healing is kind of important if you are going that method. Because what happens is if you get hit again while that is still grayed out, you will lose all of those hit points that are in the gray. So healing regularly with Torgal and making sure that you can, get back up to a full solid bar is generally recommended. So the best way to make sure that you don't die is to evade and evade on time. Like most games, evading comes in kind of two main parts. There is the perfect evade, which is what they're going to teach you initially in the game, and that works really good. That's what you're going to use a vast majority of the time. It's where an attack is coming towards you, and you want to go ahead and just evade a little bit before the attack hits you. The other thing, though, is if you instead attack the enemy right as they're making that attack, you can, in a sense, parry them. And when you do that, it does kind of stagger them for a little bit and give you a window through which you can deal damage. So those are the ways to avoid damage in Final Fantasy XVI, at least that I've unlocked so far. The last piece of the mechanics, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it is Torgal. So on the D-pad, if you hit up, he will do kind of like a dash attack. You can spam this, but it doesn't do much because there's an animation with it. So don't feel like you need to spam it as often as it comes up. My recommendation is to press it when you need him to get in close to something, or if you want to have him change targets to help you kill something. But for the most part, if you leave him alone, he'll actually do his own thing and still deal pretty good damage. It is just slightly better to have him attack every 2 to 3 seconds. Down on the D-pad is him launching an enemy into the air. I have yet to use any aerial combat because for the most part it doesn't really help me. I know games like Darksiders, Devil May Cry, Ninja Gaiden, right? Like these action games, generally it is recommended to launch things into the air so they can't hit you. But like the things that are very deadly in Final Fantasy 16 aren't launchable, so it's not like it really helps. Anyways, my 2 cents. And yeah, that's like the main cornerstone of mechanics that you will be dealing with in Final Fantasy 16. The next videos you're going to be seeing are going to be on story. We will touch on mechanics, some of the various like nomenclature, so words and things you need to know for the game. As we go through those videos, we're going to make sure that we go through, what everything is, a little bit of lore, and a whole lot of story. So that will be what is coming out next. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving this video a like. And of course, give me a comment if there's any specific subset that you think I should explain in more detail, or if there's something that would help for, videos going forward. And as always, I will see you on the next one.